Okay, I'm listening to the radio right now. Let's turn it down. Yeah, I remember when I first moved to Norway about 3 years ago. I would panic when I heard it because I did not understand one word. And that's basically what people try to do when they listen to the radio. Language students try to comprehend. And there's a lot more than just comprehending the words and everything. There's a kind of a process to it. I knew nothing about it, no grammar, anything. And 3 years later, yes, I can understand much more. I can pretty much understand what everybody's talking about, like the subject in general. And a lot of times I can understand exactly what they're saying. But there was a process to the whole thing, and I just wanted to share that with other people who are learning Norwegian, and maybe it will help you to speed up the process a little bit. Although, I mean, it does take time. There is no instant magic secret to it, but understanding the process, even for me now, helps a lot. You know, I'm dealing with right now, I guess, sometimes I misunderstand details when I hear them. So, you know, that's my latest thing. I'll understand the meaning in general, and then I understand a lot of details, but I might get some of them wrong, and it can be a little confusing, but it gets better and better. So let's go through some of this first. You know, Norsk radio, what is it? It helps to kind of define what you're listening to beforehand. You know, what is it? Just is it that you're listening to? Mostly it's dialect, but sometimes you'll hear bokmål or nynorsk read aloud. There's Danish, Swedish, English, Samish spoken, and the Swedish is really hard for me to tell the difference between that and certain dialects in Norwegian, but there's all kinds of stuff. You can tell Samish, that's really easy. And the English is actually, it's kind of good because a lot of times when you hear a Norwegian right in the middle of a sentence, they will break into English to say an expression that doesn't necessarily translate over to Norwegian, or they'll do it just for fun, you know. So there's a lot of English in there as well. So you got all these things, and sociolect is really important. Sociolect is, you know, a businessman talks differently than a teenager, and a fisherman, you know, talks differently than, say, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, if you know what I mean. They use different words, and they use the same words differently. So that's one thing you want to pay attention to. And then you have all of these variations here can be put into formats. You know, there's different formats. So the news will sound much different than a comedy program or a speech. You know, children's programming is much different than live sports or a debate, and on and on and on. I mean, this isn't a complete list of everything that you can hear, but it's just sort of an example. One of the best things you can listen to in the beginning are interviews. Interviews are very close to a conversation. I mean, they are a conversation, and those are, of course, the news is also good, but the news tends to use a lot of official sort of news type words. So that's a good way to get become familiar with those types of words, you know. And then of course there's advertising, which has all kinds of crazy stuff in it, and it can throw you for a loop, you know, because there's a lot of expressions and jokes that you may not get. You add on top of that, you have people that mumble. Some talk clearly. Some use uptalk or uptone. Some people talk fast, and then you get strange accents. You know, I was just listening to a guy. I said, "Well, geez, what?" I asked my wife, "What dialect is that?" And she said, "He's foreigner, you know. That's like you. He's some guy that just um, moved here when he was sort of a teenager, probably, and still has an accent. So a lot of times, also, there's like stylized speech, exaggerated words. It's DJs will use that, or you know, they're trying to be entertaining and they're trying to be professional and keep your attention. So people will talk really fast and then stop on one word. And it's good to, you know, good to be familiar with all of this. That is what you're listening to, and more. There's more. There's more than just this. So, you know, except for the foreign languages, and Danish and Swedish are so close that if you've ever heard riksdansk, it's very, very flat, but it sounds just like bookmall, you know. I mean, it almost is. Aside from that, these are just variations of Norwegian, and it's important to try to identify what you're listening to when you're tuning in, you know. The variations themselves are remembered in long-term memory, sort of like you would remember different kinds of trees, you know. They're very easy to remember after a while. You may not know what it's called or if a specific dialect or whatever, but the way of speaking, like the way of pronouncing R's and so forth, kind of gets stored after a while. It's pretty easy. It's good to do that too. It's really good to expose yourself to these variations, because if you don't live here in Norway and then you move here after learning bookmall, you're going to really be surprised, because everybody speaks slightly differently. All right, talk about the memory now. How does the memory work, just briefly? The short-term memory, and I have some studies with information about the study results in the links. You can read them. They're both of them are really good, and they're kind of short, so easy to read. The short-term memory works with the long-term memory, and the short-term memory can only remember an average of 7 things, like 5 to 9 things, 5 to 9 words or phrases at a time. But if some of that information is already on the in the long-term memory, the new information gets combined. So it's interesting how that works. If you understand that, I mean, it's a little bit more complicated than this. I simplified it, but it's described in those 2 research papers. Repetition, you know, just reinforces the memory. So let's just here we go. Let's say that you don't know any Norwegian and you listen to the radio. There's the little information coming. You can probably tell that it's an interview, right? Just like an interview on the radio in your whatever country you live in, your first language. You can tell if the people are speaking clearly or mumbling, and you can tell if they're speaking fast, you know. So that's a good way to start, you know, focusing your attention. And this is active listening, you know. This is when you're just 100% listening and not doing anything else. Not the temptation is always to think, well, I listened to the radio while I did, you know, took a shower or something. You know, you really want to be sitting there and concentrating on it. That's what active listening is, and as opposed to passive listening. So here it is a little later. You know, you after learning either at school or however you learn that wow, this sounds like bookmall being read aloud. It's the news. The lady has a slight accent. You're not sure where it is, but there's an accent there, and she's exaggerating her words. You know, she's adding some style to it. You know, so you can start to recognize these things pretty fast. You know, I mean, without really knowing a lot of vocabulary and whatnot. So there's a lot going on in the beginning that it's good to pay attention to. Here they call it the magic 7 or the magical 7, whatever. And the short-term memory just remembers the words, and as the new words come in, the old ones get replaced, and it happens. They only stay for about 20 or 30 seconds. Once it's in your long-term memory, once you really remember it's unlimited, and pretty much forever. Of course, I guess there's a limit, but for all practical purposes, it is unlimited. You can just keep on remembering more and more and more. So now with passive listening, this is where you're sitting and you're just listening and you're doing something else, maybe even reading, and it's the radio's in the background. What I've found is once I know all this stuff, once it's in my long-term memory, I can still identify these things that I'm listening to, and it just advances more and more. So like if you were born and raised in Norway and you listened to the radio passively, you would understand everything, even though you weren't really fully paying attention to it. So there are stages of progress that you go through. So passive listening is really good for something called knowledge of results, where you want to confirm what you know. So even if you only know like 500 words or 300 words, you'll hear them. In passive listening, though, and it confirms that. Hey, yeah, I know that. You may not understand any of the meaning, and our Norse course teacher recommended, don't listen to, your own home language. Listen to the Norwegian, even if you don't understand it passively like this, and actively, but it's kind of good because it actually sort of gets you used to the way the language sounds and everything. So that's all good. And it can also be turned into active listening. If you just stop what you're doing, the other thing, and turn up the volume, grab a pen and a piece of paper, and you really start to, you're really listening. So as far as memory research and all that stuff goes, words and phrases can be described as meaningfully coded units. In other words, and so if you've ever felt like you're sort of code breaking when you're listening to the radio, you are, so listening comprehension, one of the things that you might want to keep in mind, it's more difficult than reading because the words come in real time, and you can't really look forward and you can't look backwards, and you have to process all this information all in real time. So if you feel like you don't understand things, there's a good reason for that. You do need to have a vocabulary. You need a base in it. But until that happens, it's cool to listen because you're becoming familiar with all kinds of things about the way people talk. The variations are important. So the short-term memory checks if the long-term memory knows any of these words, and then the grammar and syntax. The syntax is things like sentence structure. They speed up the processing of understanding it, the comprehension, and that's how it's described as working. Basically, knowledge of vocabulary, like prepositional phrases and fast uttrykk. That's the content of what you're understanding, and the more of that of course, the more content you will understand. But the knowledge of grammar and syntax and speech patterns, that speeds up the process. So you can really figure out quickly what's going on. So let's see. At one point or another, you start to get so good at this that you start to anticipate what the next information here coming down the line is going to be. If somebody's going to start to, they're in the middle of saying something, you start to sort of anticipate what they're going to say. So if you're at that level, you're doing great. Here's an example of something that happens with where you get this for free. You can learn. You learn and instantly memorize things. One day I heard somebody say "Gratulerer sumi" and medagenden, and I had already known in my long-term memory "Gratulerer meddagen," and I knew "somia," and I also knew "din," "dit," "dina." You know, I understood that. I understood how these all of this works, but I had never heard this phrase before, "Gratulerer sumi and medagenden." And what's really cool is this went right into my long-term memory because I already knew the components of it and I understood how they worked. And I remember how the guy said it too, and I remember I was listening late at night. It's weird; it all just went right into long-term memory. So. If the short-term memory, if you kind of build, and that's where listening to the radio at a certain point, when you have your vocabulary, and why it's important to build up a really big vocabulary, because once you have that, you start to build and put pieces of it together in your memory, and in this case it happens. This is a simple example of how that works, but it works on all kinds of levels, and it's amazing. I mean, maybe you might have to practice it a little bit. So if, say you didn't know this sentence really and you wanted to remember it, or you weren't sure, here's the process that you can use to remember things on the radio that you hear. Repeat the phrase 5 times using subvocalization, and subvocalization is when you say the words silently in your mind, basically. So, and that's a really good thing to have. So you can use that while you're walking down the street, and people won't think you're crazy talking to yourself. You then write the phrase down on paper, spell it the best you can. You know, you may not be able to spell it exactly right, but you know, write it down quickly, and then you can put the phrase into Google Translate. Or you can run it through like a search engine and see what comes up. A lot of times spell check will fix your spelling for you. If not, then maybe it's a miss, you know, and that happens. But sometimes it works. It works for me like 3/4 of the time. I get good results, and then I check them. I check them with the search engine, and I ask Norwegian friends. I ask my wife, you know, is this right? You know, is this the right thing? And what's interesting is the whole process helps you to remember because you're working with it. It adds more meaning to the whole phrase, you know, because you've been working with it and you've heard how it was said, and then you know it's real. It's confirmed as a real thing, you know. So here's like a search engine. You know, you just see it. It's highlighted. It's really easy. It's a good tool. And then, so anyway, rehearse the phrase with flashcards, or use it in your conversation if you live here in Norway. You know, use it on people. And practice it with flashcards. Then you'll remember it till it's automatic. Local dialect. This is an amazingly good tool for learning local dialect. Here's some scribbles. This is what I do. I just write it down how it sounds, and if there's something I can use, great. If not, there's, you know, the radio's always going to be there. It's going to be playing all the time, so you don't need to panic. You don't need to learn it all at once either, because well, you're not going to. So at least if you're normal, average, you know. So here's an example of the process for local dialect. Here's mine. I wrote down Kodafela. You know, that's what I heard. Then I found out from my wife that if you wanted to spell it on Facebook or something, you would say Kodafela, right? And when I first heard it, though, I remember how it sounded. It sounded like Kodafela, Kodafela, okay? Then you go, and it's important to learn the bookmall version of that, too, so you know how to say it that way as well. And I can say this in my local town, you know, and people understand what I mean either way, but they really like it when I say this much more. So, hva det som feiler deg, okay? And that's the bookmall version. I like to be kind of middle of the road with the bookmall But with local dialect, I just go ahead and exaggerate it, imitate it and exaggerate it, because the local dialect has a lot to do with the accent and everything. People are going to know that you're not really from that town originally, but it's cool when you try. So the point is to just speak the way everybody else does, to the best you can. I'm kind of happy with my own accent. It evolves, so it's weird. But here's some other tips for listening to the radio. Take it slow at first. Just try to figure out what you're listening to in general, and who you're listening to, like sociolect. What, that way you get a feel for how the words are used by different people. Comprehension, remember, it's limited by your knowledge of vocabulary and grammar, so keep your expectations realistic. Don't be disappointed or frustrated or panic like I used to do if you don't understand anything at the beginning, because how could you if you only have a limited vocabulary? Of course, your comprehension will be limited. In the beginning, too, you might want to be selective and listen when you're really trying to match up your vocabulary with what you're hearing on the radio. Listen to people who are speaking clearly, not like a football match where the announcer is shouting and there's a lot of noise, or somebody's mumbling and you can't really hear what they're saying, or a call-in show where you can hardly hear what somebody's saying on the phone. And pay special attention to pronunciation and try to imitate it. And what I mean by pronunciation is, the most important thing for me with that is say the word problem. Okay, you want to ingen problem. You would say ingen problem. You wouldn't say ingen problem. It's really emphasis. They call it pressure. Pressure on the word. That's important, because sometimes people won't understand what you're saying if you don't do that. Okay, let's keep going. Kind of running out of time. Have fun with it and compare dialects. Listen to the different dialects. It doesn't mean you have to learn them all, but just listen to the way they sound. This guy commented and left this beautiful link in the comments section on the dialect video that I did, and this is really good. This is a blast. You can hear a lot of people from all over the country, and thank you UN News or Reme for that. Second language students can experience a sudden, and I'm going to put links for all of these, as many as I can, so you can just go there. Second language students can experience a sudden increase in comprehension of these dialects after in the third year. I'll show a link to that. It's Spanish is the language that I saw this study on, but it's the same idea. People that are learning the language, and really big in the fourth and fifth. So just keep going. Don't lose hope. And I have experience. I can start to understand some of this. It's not because I pay attention to the different ways people say things. I'm keyed into how they're saying it. And since every Norwegian speaks differently, exposure to this will get you ready for conversation, which is the whole idea. Unless you're just learning it for some other reason, isn't that what you want to do, is talk to, in Norwegian with Norwegians. So, but they all speak differently, so that'll help you not go into a state of shock when somebody speaks a little differently than whatever you're used to listening to. And also your personal pronunciation and your own accent. How are you going to speak? Usually what I would recommend, just speak the way you do. Let it happen naturally, and don't worry about having an accent. Just try to speak clearly, tydelig, so people can understand you, and never speak faster than you can understand other people. That's a little tip there, because people will go ballistic. They'll go full speed if you do that. Podcasts are great because you can replay the words and phrases if you want to and record it. I like to write them down. I like to do that myself. It's to me, it's more. If you, chances are you're gonna have to do that anyway. So, but if you find a podcast you really like, you can just get a free capture program and capture it. You know, words and phrases that appear most often, like with a lot of repetition. Those are really good to learn first. So, of course, you can. It fills in the blocks and chunks of your understanding for the radio. Like if you keep hearing the same phrase repeated over and over again, then you learn that, and it helps. It makes things go faster. It's like a piece of the puzzle. And if one single word holds you back from understanding completely a sentence, look it up immediately. It's really a good idea. Short phrases are better to learn than single words, just like with reading, because the words are in context. But probably when you start, the shorter the better. It's a little overwhelming. Sometimes you can get a sentence that really just goes on and on and on and on and on, and it's good to learn in pieces as well. Really, that's the best way. But single words can be very misleading. They'll unless they're in context. Active listening, I'm going fast because we're running out of time. Active listening is the most effective, in short sessions that are spaced apart. Don't try to listen 100% all day long. I get better results doing it at little, intervals. And but passive listening is great. Just leave the radio on. Let's just keep going. Comprehension level may seem like you're not making any progress. Then all of a sudden, wow, you've got a 20% lift in your comprehension, and that's normal. It happens. There's a lot of explanations for that, but it happened to me, and other people have told me that it happens. So don't be surprised about that, and don't be frustrated if it hasn't happened to you yet. And remember, there's always weird stuff, there's homophones, which are words that sound the same, synonyms that have words that have this similar meaning. These are going to leave yourself a little room for a certain amount of built-in confusion, because it's not going to be perfect, in other words. And then overlearning, the more and more you learn the same thing over and over and over again, the more you're going to remember it. And the radio is great for that because a lot of things come up over and over again. And just remember that the short-term memory, that's like just the words floating in your short-term memory. But the long-term memory is where all the meaning happens, the translating and eventually the understanding is all in your long-term memory. So you really want to get everything in your long-term memory. So that's about it, and I'm under 30 minutes. So look at the live links for reference. If you have any questions or I forgot to include something, I'll put it in the comments or under the description. But till next time, look at till and ha de bra.